at the stroke of a quill. The Hebrew she became the Greek it, and then the English he. And no one cared as the bright feminine words fluttered to the cold floor like clipped wings of a dove. But can a mother forget her child, or a child forget her mother?
Carol Lynn Pearson, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Oh, I am so happy to be here. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I am just thrilled to be talking to you. I mentioned in the email that I sent to you, but I'm just going to reiterate for our listeners that your work, both on Heavenly Mother specifically, and also on LGBTQ issues and concerns within the church and polygamy, there have just been so many things that you've written about that have been so meaningful for my personal faith journey. And I'm really thrilled today to be able to focus in on a couple of your works. One from when I was 4 years old, so 28 years ago, I believe, is when Mother Wove the Morning came out. Is that right? Or was it 1990? What year was Mother Wove the Morning?
I first performed that play in 1989.
Okay, the year I was born. So a work that's been out for all of my life. I'd love to talk some about that. And then your recent publication, Finding Mother God, 2020, right?
Yes.
Which was just
very exciting.
Balm to the soul. So those are kind of two very different time periods. And I'd love to hear through our conversation today a bit about each of how those works came to be. So starting first with the first one, Mother Wove the Morning, will you tell the story of writing it? What precipitated it? How was it received? Anything else you want to tell us about that work and how it came to be?
Sure. Oh boy, that is such a great, it's not a memory, it's just a part of me.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike you and most LDS women, I was on fire with all of this as an adolescent, maybe even a pre-adolescent. I seem to have come into the world just looking around and saying, what's wrong with this picture? Why is everything in this church, in this world really, because the radio only had male voices on it at that time, essentially. I thought, why is everything I'm listening to that's important or watching is male? There's only male people up on the stand at church, and we really only hear stories about male people. And I'm not sure when I zeroed in on God is male, but as I processed all that, it seemed to me that what we would now call ground zero is the phenomenon that we see our Creator as male. And that translated to me that I then, as a woman, had a secondary gender. I was not first class in this kingdom. And all through high school, I thought about that and inquired about that. And I remember at BYU speaking to some of my very admired and excellent professors. And I will never forget one conversation I had with one of my professors in the theater department. And I said to him, tell me, do you think that God values maleness more than femaleness? And he thought a moment and said, well, I guess I would have to say yes, because God, being God, could choose to be anything God wanted to be, and God chose to be male. Mm-hmm. Now, it boggles my mind that if a man would say that, he would not understand the bullet that he's throwing into the mind and heart of a woman. But that was the ground that I was walking on. And I just searched everywhere. And of course, all we had in our church was that one little verse of Eliza R. Snow that we would sing maybe once a year. But that was very intriguing to me. But somewhere along the line, I don't know precisely where, but I just began searching in history for how the gender of God was perceived. And as I started finding things, I thought, wow, there's so much out here in the history that goes back and back and back. And then I found a statement by a mythologist saying, the further back you push the history of man, the more you find the history of woman. So I started keeping a file, just a box of a file with manila folders about different periods of history where something happened identifiably about the feminine part of God. And I would read and Xerox and put it in there. So I developed this wonderful file of all these folders that gave me information on what was then to me a fact that is not just a given that God is male. You know, in every class we ever went to listen about the nature of God, you start out, well, God is a glorified man. And again, what does that do to us? It is just astonishing to me that for all these decades, very few people who are in positions of authority in the church ever looked at that and said, wow, is there something a little misleading about that? That just boggles my mind still. But as I continued living and growing, and I got my master's in theater at BYU, and then married my dear husband, Gerald Pearson, he and I found that we each had our own gender issues. I knew that his gender issue was that he was gay, but that was going to be overcome as promised by our church. And my gender issue was that why is maleness a superior commodity to femaleness? And so we were a good match in looking at gender. And he was very, very supportive of my quest. And of course, I was of his quest. And people who don't know what I'm talking about find my early book, Goodbye, I Love You. So somewhere it must have been in the 80s that I really, really, really caught fire and began studying all the things that were in my accumulated file and reaching out to find more and more and more. But I was pretty much alone, you know, as far as I knew in the church. I guess I knew that there were a few organizations here or there, or maybe an occasional article somewhere that sort of led into it. But as far as I really felt, I was on my own. And I was just so compelled, feeling I have to do something with this. And of course, I had already become something of an established writer. My husband made that happen. In our very first year of our marriage, he insisted that we publish that little book of poems called Beginnings, which was a bizarre success and really put me on the map in Mormondom. So that opened a lot of doors to me. So I knew that what I would be doing would be writing. And I was playing with the idea of a novel. I'm not a novelist. And anyway, I was just thinking about all this one day. I remember I was taking a walk up in the hills just right here by my home. And I was just puzzling over how am I going to approach this? And it just kind of came to me. See, I never get revelations of the kind that you got to say, oh, the heavens opened and this information was given to me. You know, I think our minds are always working in a revelatory kind of thing of us making connections that are correct. So anyway, for the first time I remember up there, I thought, oh, you know, all of the women in my files here, there are a lot of individual women that I sort of point toward, and I could just write like something that is in the voice of each of the women as a little essay sort of thing from them. And then I thought, oh, wow, no, this is a very dramatic kind of thing. I could create a play in which each of these women speaks their story. And that just really just opened a gigantic window of light in my creative mind. And then I said, well, guess what? If I did that, I could perform that play. Because after all, I do have a master's degree in theater. And I did get Best Actress Award 2 times at BYU. So I bet you I could do this. I hadn't been on the stage for all these decades. And I'm truly not a performer, but dang, this just caught. I was just on fire with all of this. So I came down from the hill and got out my files, and I went through them and actually just had kind of a little meeting with all these women, finding out which one was dramatic enough that I could arrange the play. And it just was so exciting. And I knew I'd go back as far as I could. And indeed, the first woman is Paleolithic. And then we go through history. We get the Greek, the Shaker woman, all of these things bringing us up to date. So I have finally had 16 women, including me, who was the person who wove it all through. And I thought, I'm going to make an attempt to put Emma Smith in there. After some of the first performances, I asked people, do you think Emma Smith belongs there, or am I just trying to put her there? Oh, no, we like Emma Smith. That was very interesting to get a little glimpse into the Mormons. So anyway, to shorten all this, I wrote the script. I hired the little theater facility in Walnut Creek, California, where I lived. I rented the theater for 4 days, for 2 weekends. And I thought, okay, I have enough friends that I can make come to this, that I can do, it'll be okay. And the theater, I think, housed just over 100. And I had a friend help me do just a little bit of publicity. I put flyers up. Oh, and before I forget, I'm going to tell you right now, it was not one of the first performances, but later on, as I was doing it in the large theater, wow, in the brand new Cultural Arts Center at Walnut Creek. Speaking of Halloween, which is coming up in a minute or two, I always went out to the lobby to greet people afterwards, and a woman grabbed me one particular night. She said, "Do you know why I'm here?" I said, "Why?" Said, because my little son went out trick-or-treating, and when he came back, in his candy, he had this flyer. And he said, this woman gave us candy, and then she gave the flyer and said, "Give this to your mother. She needs it." So she said, "That's why I'm here." And I'm glad you did. Well, see, I have had to be very creative.
That's a good idea.
On my own about every step of the way, studying it, writing it, thinking about it, promoting it, directing it, staging it. It was a very minimal theatrical play with a big trunk here, a carpet here, a podium here that became a table. And it was really quite interesting the way that I handled all that. The very first performance I did at St. Mary's College. Some of my people who I'd invited into my home to listen to readings of it. The Catholics were very excited about this play. I eventually performed it for an international conference of the Sisters of Mercy. But back to the beginning, it was just like the night before I was to perform it at St. Mary's College that we had the big earthquake here of 1989. And my young daughter and I were just scrambling, and I was just holding onto the door jambs. And I said, "Oh, dear God, don't make me die before I can do this play even one time." There was no significant damage here. But so anyway, I just started doing it. And it was very, very exciting. I kept filling up this little theater down in downtown Walnut Creek. And it was very, very exciting. So it just took off. And after I played here in this area for a few weeks, my feminist friends in Salt Lake City said, "We need you in Utah." So they did all the groundwork and brought me to a little theater in Utah. And we sold that out. Oh, I just remember the night my dear friend, church historian Leonard Arrington, came a little bit he wasn't late, but by the time he got there, all of the seats in this small theater were filled. I could do nothing about that. So he graciously said, well, I'll just come back then, won't I? So anyway, it just took off. And I began to get invitations from women's groups here and there and universities. And sometimes I produced the play on my own. I found a little theater in San Francisco that I rented for Friday and Saturday night for 6 months. I went in by our trained Bart and performed there. And it just, not to my surprise, but to my enormous delight, the audiences were so enthusiastic. And so the 1990s in my life were dedicated to performing that play. So that's just what I'll give you there. Do you have any questions about that?
Oh, well, I wish we could just talk about it for hours, because there are so many things I would love to hear more about. I just have two that I'm going to ask now, though. So in your early performances in California, what was the religious background of most of your audience members? Do you have a feel for that?
Oh, well, maybe initially because my circle was composed of Mormon people, and the word spread quite rapidly. There were a lot of Mormon people that came. But that was not how it continued. I mean, there were lots and lots of women from various denominations. And I soon got in good touch with, all of the goddess people, the people who don't have necessarily religion, but, the pagan types. I'm sorry, I should not say they don't have a religion, but their religion is very different from the patriarchal religions that we are familiar with. And so I made some really good friends among the interfaith women, and it really went big with all of those. So it turned out to be much, much more than a Mormon endeavor.
That's awesome. Another question I have, it's okay if you don't feel like going into this. I was wondering, as you were talking about this being your pursuit of the 90s, what came to mind for me was the September 6th in 1993.
Oh.
Many of whom were excommunicated or disfellowshipped for their scholarly work. And it seems that some of the reason was for work relating to Heavenly Mother. And I'm just wondering if you had any trepidation or worry that the work you were doing would get you, quote, in trouble, or any concerns like that.
No, I had no trepidation. I had no worry, because I knew that whatever came to me, I would willingly take it, because what I was doing, I knew to be correct.
Yeah.
But you see, there's something odd about me and my journey in the church. Maybe it's a matter of geography. Maybe it's a matter that I just have been extraordinarily fortunate in my priesthood leadership for decades. Maybe it was just the history is protecting the work that I've been doing. But I have never been, quote, called in by a priesthood leader. And I have been always very much appreciated and utilized in my ward and in my state. Now, in the 90s, and when the September 6th had that big event, my state president at the time, and he and I had occasionally talked about things. In fact, I'm remembering now, around the time that there was that little upsetting thing about some people praying to Heavenly Mother, and President Hinckley saying in a women's meeting, this is not appropriate, that we will not do this. I remember in a conversation I had with my state president, not being called in, but just a conversation, he brought that up. And I said, listen, you don't have to worry about that with me, because while I have for decades in my private prayers addressed them to Father, Mother, God, I have never done that in a church meeting, and I never will. He said, oh, I'm glad to hear that, and I want you to give the opening prayer in state conference next month. So, and that was the very stake president who told me And I learned only a couple of years ago through somebody else that it was 7 times this stake president was called. And the way he reported it to me, he said, "Yes, Carolyn, I get calls from Salt Lake City about you saying, should we be doing something about Sister Pearson?" And he said, "I say to them, leave her alone. She does better PR for this church than you could ever buy. Leave her alone." So evidently 7 different times, that was his reply to somebody calling about me from Salt Lake City.
Well, I feel very fortunate, and I feel that many others feel the same way, that you were protected from any sort of disciplinary action because we need you.
Well, right. And see, I built up a history of all of my good, simple,
Yes,
unavoidably beautiful things,
yes.
beginnings, all my poems.
I'll walk with you.
My turn on earth. I mean, and I did not ever cross the line of criticizing the brethren in Salt Lake.
Mm-hmm.
I never did any of that. I just went about my business.
Mm-hmm.
So, and to this day, I have excellent relationships with my leadership and with the past leadership. We could go on and on about that all that for hours. Let's just do that unless you want to know more.
Well, thank you for indulging me and just answering a little bit of my curiosity about that. So we talked about, you did this play throughout the 90s. Let's fast forward a bit to Finding Mother God, which you published in 2020. I know that some of the poems had been previously published in other works, but I'm wondering if you could choose a few of your favorite poems from Finding Mother God, this book of poetry, and tell us a bit about why they're particularly important to you.
Sure. And well, see, I need to give just a little bit of backstory.
Oh, please do.
Because I had continuously been frustrated that nobody's doing anything different.
Mm-hmm.
And I showed, don't you understand how important Mother Wove the Morning was? So anyway, I thought, well, I've done my part. I don't have a new piece of anything that I have to give. Mother Wove the Morning was my big gift on this subject, and that's it. But 2.5 years ago now, or whatever, I went to a fireside in Berkeley, and a scholar gave a presentation on women in Mormon history, and I became so angry, as did a number of women there. Not that he was telling not the truth; he was just telling the truth. Mm-hmm. The whole history, that some of the good things that Joseph did to try to give women some power, and then it was pretty much taken away. And then correlation really did a number on women, and no more female autonomy ever at all. And we could take a look at what happened today with the giving up with the annihilation of the annual women's session. But maybe we don't want to even get into that.
There's so much we could.
But so when I went to this fireside, I was just set on fire with, how is it? And at the end of the fireside, I raised my hand and I said, so what would it take for the brethren to do something really, really important, like addressing the half of God that is feminine? And he said, "Oh, Heavenly Mother, well, I don't know. I don't think there's any of the brethren who would be interested in doing the heavy lifting that would be required to address a subject like that." And it just made me so angry. So truly, truly angry. And the woman I drove over with her in her car. She was furious, as were a number of women that I spoke to afterwards. And anyway, the next day I was angry. I was so angry that I cried. I did cry. Not that I believe any of that stuff, but that it is so painful to watch as the brethren in this church in general. I mean, down here at the bottom, there's some who understand, I think. But to watch the leadership be so obtuse, so unwilling to address this vital, vital subject was so painful to me that I just cried. And then when I stopped crying, I grabbed a notebook and I wrote a poem. And I hadn't really written poems for decades.
Mm-hmm.
That was also something way in my past. But that's what I felt right now. And then the next day I wrote another poem. The next day I wrote 3 poems. And I just kept going. And then it started to feel so good. And I wasn't angry anymore. I was celebrating. I was celebrating the fact that I can do this and that other people can do whatever they're going to do. So I just kept writing. And I had all these poem ideas just lined up, waiting for their turn. And it was really just one of the most thrilling experiences that I've had, of just going to bed knowing that the next morning I could I'll work on this one in the morning. So that is how all that happened. So you inquired about me reading a few.
Yes, please.
Okay, we could go on for hours.
Uh-huh.
Here's one that I think is kind of a good introduction for people who don't have a large background in this. A God who looks like me. I studied the drawings and the statues and the words marked God, hoping to find a face that looks like me, a female face. But they all looked like my brothers. And I love my brothers, but it's like finding an empty stocking on Christmas morning and wondering why I have not been not good enough to look like God, but not wanting to spoil the celebration for my brothers who never notice. A voice said, "Come to the grove. At the grove, there is always a God who looks like you." I went to the grove, and there were ribbon streams that flowed and curved, and there were trees stately in long green gowns that waved in the wind. A voice said, "Come to the pool." I went to the pool, and I knelt and peered into the water, still as a mirror, still as a moon, and I saw the image of God. There was one face, and then the face became 2, like when you stare with soft vision, and one of the faces looked like me. She said, "It is wonderful to see you seeing me." He said, "I am so sorry. It never was intended that she be erased. Mistakes were made." Then she said, "Bless you for searching until you found me, and do forgive your brothers, for they knew not what they did. But I knew, and I know, and I weep. You and I are half of heaven, and to forget that is a curse in the land." Then he said, "Go, tell it on the mountain." "But this is only a poem," I said. "Then go read it on the mountain." And then the 2 faces became one again. "A question, if I may," I said hesitantly. "Are you 2, or are you 1? The water shimmered, and I heard a choral reading of soprano and tenor and smile. "We are 1 that is 2, and 2 that are 1. How can that be?" He said, "The solitary 1 is primordial, but often useless. Imagine that buck without the doe. Imagine this H2 without the O," she added, "or distance without time, or the occasional essential rhyme. Then both. We do arithmetic differently here." A soft and rippling laugh, like a kiss, as the face in the pool in the grove disappeared.
Thank you.
Certainly. Here's one that I knew I had to, and I wanted to write something to sort of, I don't know, maybe give a little relief, a little comfort to people who are wondering, wait, is it okay that she's even doing this? Should she be doing this? So this is the way this one turned out. And actually, this is one that was very, very moving for me to write. I knew I was going to write it. I knew in general where it was going to go, but I just didn't have it at all clear in my mind. So I came into this office and I did my morning meditation that always precedes my morning prayer. And then as I was going into the prayer, I just went into the question that was being asked by this poem, which I knew is a very important question. And as I went into that question, and I sort of knew where it was going, but it just led itself so movingly and beautifully in these images and in the feeling that I had. And it was so powerful. And I noticed that I was crying. I could not even stop these tears. But it was such a delicious place to stay that I didn't want to come out. I just didn't. But I knew I've got to come out now because I want to take with me exactly what I'm feeling and visualizing right now. So I made myself come out and just found tears down my neck. So I grabbed my notebook and this is what I wrote. Asking Father, I tiptoed into prayer. Hesitantly, Father, do you mind that I am giving so much attention to her these days? There were no words. There was thought. I thought there was an instant embrace, warm, I thought, and soft and strong, that drew me in so close and drew the mother in so close. And there we were, held tight in a circle of three, a familial trinity. That's what I thought. What I know is this. Tears on my cheeks. Amen.
That's one of my favorites as well.
Yeah. Okay, here's one that's really one of my favorites. And this doesn't even address the gender of God. There are some of these that don't specifically address the gender of God. Some that just look at how we relate to this phenomenon that we call God. Yeah, this thought I've had for a long time. The title is What Good is God? God the noun, good the adjective. A simple O varies them. Last night, exhausted not from the day, but from the burdens, the perennial grief, the confusion, all of which I knew would wake me in the morning with a cold kiss, I mouthed not a prayer, but a question. What good is God? Truly, what good is God? I listened, hoping I might hear some goodly explanation. Crickets. I had discovered that God is not a good conversationalist. So I made up this exchange. Dear God, Is watching the world just spectator sport to you? Couldn't you get a little more involved? All these prayers, God, what's the use? So you think you have prayed for bread and I've given you a stone? You could put it that way, even if that were true, which it is not. What would your friend Jesus tell you to do about it? Do? Like return good for evil, love your enemies, bless those that curse you. I didn't say you cursed me. Like pray for those that mistreat you or give you a stone instead of bread. Pray for you. I laughed. Pray for God. If I don't answer your prayers, you could answer mine. That's what Jesus would say. You pray without ceasing. For what? I pray that you will not give me a stone, but that you will give me bread, that you will feed my sheep. Feed my sheep. I kept waking in the night as warm little kisses reminded me of the time after time dear ones had lifted my stones, had given me bread, had fed this little sheep.
Thank you. After you finish reading each poem, I think, oh, we could discuss it more, but I don't. They speak for themselves. I don't want to.
I have a couple more here if we have time.
Please, that would be great.
This is a bit of a longer one, but it's very important. It covers history and it brings it right to where we are now.
Excellent.
So Our Mother and Her Dove. This is page 78, if anybody wants to read along. Our Mother and Her Dove. I sent out a dove to find the mother, and I left the window open. The mother, whose signature was the dove in ancient days, written with a flourish of feathers, white against blue. So many of the first goddesses were known by the doves in their hands or the doves in their hair. There was Asherah of the groves, the tree of life sprung from Mother Earth and adopted as the Hebrew goddess. The wind came, the wind lifting the dove and shaking the tree, the ruach, the wind, the breath, the spirit, a force all feminine. The Spirit of God, Ruach Elohim, was hovering over the waters, and her children knew she was the female presence, the indispensable aspect of the God that created them in God's own image, created them male and female. She suckled the Hebrews and fed the early Christians, and they gave thanks to her as mother, their mother, whom they called the Holy Spirit, whose dove descended to bless the baptism of Jesus. That same dove I sent out when I left the window open. History has drawn an unholy curtain between us and our ancient mother. But I pulled back the veil and I saw. Here's what they did. The monks who translated to please the powers that be, and the powers were he. At the stroke of a quill, the Hebrew she became the Greek it, and then the English he. And no one cared as the bright feminine words fluttered to the cold floor like clipped wings of a dove. But can a mother forget her child, or a child forget her mother? I sent out a dove to find her, and I left the window open. The dove is sister to the homing pigeon, so I knew that she could find her way back. I had touched her sweet, soft head, and she knew the scent of me. I sent out a dove, and she returned. She fluttered through the window to my open hand. A note was tied to her leg, a little scroll written by the one for whom she is a sign. It read, "Dear one, please forgive the monks. I know you love poetry, so here are 3 haiku from me to you. The past is dust and dissolves in one small gust of God's eternity. Feel the wind shifting. Feel the Ruach Elohim sweep across the land. Feel me move through the holy of holies of your heart and build a nest. Love to all. Please tell the others." I write back to her each evening in my prayers. Sometimes I call her Holy Spirit, often merely Mother.
Thank you. I can hear just like the echoes of all of the research that you did over the years in finding out the history of our Mother God in that poem.
Oh, wow. Yes. In this book, there's a lot of history, but there's so many wonderful scholarly books written by mythologists, and it's really quite thrilling. And if anybody's interested in see, I performed Mother Wove the Morning over 300 times. Mm-hmm. And I hired a good filmmaker to film it. So the video is available now, along with the complete book, at my website, which is just my name, carolynpearson.com. As, of course, is this book, and I'll be glad to assign them to you specifically. Yes. If you want to go to my website, or you can get this on Amazon. The DVD of the play you can't get on Amazon. You have to go through my website to get that. Mm-hmm. But it's just such a needed thing. Here we are in a motherless house, and the motherless house is one of the first poems in this book. And I'm told is one of the first things that was written in contemporary Mormondom about the loss of our Heavenly Mother. Mm-hmm. So, Sara, I could go on and on reading more and more of those. If there's one in particular that you wanted, or if you just want to move a little bit further into whatever you might have in mind, or wind this up, I leave it in your care.
Well, I feel like I hope that those were just delicious tastes that are tantalizing people to go to your website to get their personally signed copies of both of these, or to Amazon if that's easier.
Before I forget, there is an audio of me reading the entire book that's available wherever you get your audios.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I'll have to find that. This is for Finding Mother God.
Yes.
Right? Awesome. Wow. Okay. I do want to ask you one more question as we wrap up, because we've kind of traced your whole history from, you said the moment you were born, you came out looking at inequity in the world and wondering how it got to be this way. And that carried with you through years. And you wrote Mother Wove the Morning multiple decades ago. and now finding Mother God. As we keep moving forward in this journey, what do you hope for her daughters?
Realizing that I'm talking about the long haul.
Okay.
The long haul. Because in our particular corner of the world, which is not the entire world that our Father, Mother God are interested in, believe me, but in our little corner of the world that we call the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, things move very, very, very slowly. But we each have our obligation. As you have found, you have your obligation to do what you're doing. And I have been serving my obligation for a long time. And so I think it is inevitable that we continue to question the nature of the heavens and the nature of divinity, that we are so accustomed to speaking of only in the masculine. There has been a bit of a shift. And sometimes we have heard the people in our local congregation, even the people up in the general authorities, speak of our heavenly parents, our heavenly parents. It seems to be more difficult for them to speak of our heavenly mother, but occasionally that has been the case. And I believe that will just continue to expand, because this is like one of those rocks cut out of the mountain that is just going to not stop, but continue to roll and accumulate. I know that it will. So my hope is that at some point, and see, we each, down here at the bottom, we each have our individual, not only right, but responsibility to create a home where our family is comfortable with speaking of the divine as our Father and Mother in heaven, or our Mother and Father in heaven, or God, our Father, Mother, or whatever it is that we'll feel comfortable with. We are always bound by our language. We're bound by our history, but we know that history just inevitably keeps moving forward. And that opens the doors for our language to move forward. And maybe as we focus on using the right language, the inviting language, then history can move more rapidly. And, like in the last 50 or 60 years, the whole phenomenon, LGBTQ acceptance, has been a stunningly rapid thing, amazingly rapid. Not so for what we call women's issues. Legally, politically, we've seen certain things happen, but there has, we don't worry about our women very much, because our women are always there just doing their job. But we have to have some women who step out of line a little bit, a lot or a little bit. And we have to have those. And I believe that there are more and more of those who are doing that and who are willing to do that. So that's my hope, that we can be the women that we want to exist in the next century or the next decade even. We have to be those women. We can't wait for those women to just pop up. We have to be them.
And raise them.
Oh, absolutely. Well. And raise them and encourage our friends to be them too. Mm-hmm. And I find that there are a lot of men, certainly in my acquaintanceship, who are very, very supportive of the work that I have been doing. I had a recent bishop a young man that spoke a lot, almost every Sunday. You could hear the phrase Heavenly Mother from him one way or another. And he spoke to the young women up at the girls' camp, specifically on an evening, asking them to identify qualities that they know they received from their Heavenly Mother. We have men who are willing to do that, and men who might want to, but feel kind of nervous that it might inhibit their movement. See, women don't, we don't have to worry about our outward movement. We're just all here in this big circle of women. No, there are relief society presidents take, but not all of that, but that's minimal. That's minimal. In general, we women are just all here in a sisterly group where, and I don't feel competition in the people that I know, in the women. The women that I know are great. We just help each other. So we just have to be a little more brave. That's it. Everyone listening to this, please, in whatever way is comfortable for you, do it. And then be a little bit more brave.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that invitation and for that example throughout your life, especially at those points where you've told the story leading to writing Finding Mother God, of just those feelings of frustration and lack of progress. Thank you for persevering through them.
Yeah. Well, may we all be blessed. May we just bless one another. And we know that in the early history of our church, women were specifically invited to do actual hands-on blessings. And then that was one of the things that we lost. But nobody can stop us from saying, oh, bless you. So I'm saying, Sara, bless you. I'm saying to everybody who's listening, just bless you, that you will have a blessed experience in doing your own calling and in incorporating the concept of the Mother God with whatever you're doing. We all have that right to say that to each other. Bless
Absolutely. You. Bless you, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Thank you for choosing to spend some time with us today. We love this community and would be thrilled to hear from you. Please leave us a review. If you would like to support the podcast, you can make a monthly donation of 99 cents on up to $9.99 at anchor.fm/inherimage/support. We hope you'll subscribe and join us again next Sunday for another inspiring episode.